Kidding. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to this live stream. We've done one earlier discussing the Saudi situation and the potential for the Saudi Arabian government to retaliate. But there was another element in all of this that I wanted to start looking into further, because those of you who watch me on the channel or listen to the X Spaces sometimes will know that I worry about the day after tomorrow, something that the American government maybe doesn't. But one of the things is the stability of Iran internally, because if Iran doesn't get control of the situation, if the government cannot find a suitable pathway forward, if there is a split in one group wanting to exercise restraint and renegotiate, and if there's another which is wanting to continue to pound the rest of the Middle East with rockets, then that leads to a power struggle, and that leads to a vacuum, and that potentially leads to greater internal instability, which, well, what does that mean? Potentially separatist movements, and one of the most notable of that is the Kurds. And if the Kurds start making movements towards their own independence, then that obviously means Turkey gets involved or has to pay attention. So there's a lot of elements here which can quickly escalate and run away. And someone that I know knows a lot more about this than I do is Vladimir, who we've had on the show before. Now, Vladimir, you know, you're based, where are you actually at the moment? You're in the middle of the region, and
yeah, I'm here in Iraqi Kurdistan. I was also recently in Syria during the fighting between Damascus and the Kurds there. But now the situation now is escalating now in Iran, so I focus more on that now. And just before you invited me, I had to run up because there was like a bombing by Iranian-backed, not Iranian-backed, but either by an Iranian-backed militia or Iran itself. So they're firing like missiles and drones on the U.S. consulate nearby, and also on the Erbil International Airport, because you have a coalition base there. And apart from that, Iran has also hit Iranian Kurdish opposition parties, as you just mentioned, because the main Kurdish Iranian opposition parties, there are a lot of them. There's like 5 of them that recently allied. They created an alliance, and then you have another factions that are more close to the Iranian opposition. So yeah, basically, I also wrote just a quick piece that one of the Kurdish leaders from Iran was calling on Kurdish conscripts in the Iranian army to defect, because also a lot of people we always focus on the IRGC, but actually in Iran you still have conscription, so people still have to serve in the army, and most of the time in most of this kind of conflicts, the conscripts are the least loyal, let's say, because they're forced to fight. They're not fighting for ideology or for salary. So I don't know if you have any more questions. Let me know. I'm talking too much now.
No, it's obviously very precarious for you there. And so, I mean, take me through a little bit. What is the situation when it comes to the Kurdish population? They're mainly in the northwest of the country. And
No.
Is it a relatively cohesive group? Are they relatively quite organized?
Well, I mean, the Iranian Kurds since the 1940s, they have their own political parties. So they have been very active. I mean, there was also a Kurdish republic in during the Soviet Union time in the 1940s, the Mahabad Republic or the Kurdistan Republic. But that was crushed after the Soviets pulled out, so it only lived for 1 year. And there was also links with Iraqi Kurds with that, because Mullah Mustafa Barzani, Iraqi Kurdish leader, he was actually before in Iran during the Mahabad Republic, but he chose to leave when he saw that the Iranian army was advancing and that the Mahabad Republic or the Kurdistan Republic was falling.
Right.
And now you have also all these Iranian Kurdish parties. They also actually were involved during 1979 during the revolution against the Shah, who now seems to be possibly coming back. We don't know if Trump doesn't make a deal with the leftovers of the current Iranian regime. And at that time also they were fighting between Iranian Kurds and Khomeini at the time. And they basically lost and they were exiled. Also, they played a role in the Iran-Iraq war. Iraq for some time supported some Iranian Kurdish groups against Iran. You know, this is also always in the Middle East, you know, like one faction backs the other against the other. For instance, Bashar al-Assad didn't like Saddam, and Saddam didn't like Bashar al-Assad, so they were always supporting groups against each other. And in Iran, you always had this proxy war. For instance, in the past, Iran supported the Kurds against Saddam, for instance. So basically, it's a very complex history, but there's a fact is that in Iran, there are several Kurdish groups that have a history of armed struggle. All of them, they have fighters, which is very different from Syria, because in Syria, you have basically main two Kurdish blocs. You have the YPG and you have the Kurdish National Council. And the Kurdish National Council initially didn't have any history of armed insurgency against the Syrian state. And actually, even the YPG, they didn't really fight. I mean, their predecessors, the PYD, or before that, they didn't really fight against the Assad regime initially, but they did later during the Syrian revolution. But that's a different topic. But in Iran, what is different from Syria is that you have again, that was another sound of an explosion in Erbil. Again, another one. So that's hitting the Erbil airport most likely. So that's the situation now, that you have several armed Kurdish groups and another explosion. So yeah, it's a bit difficult to concentrate like that. But anyway, so there's different groups like that, and actually they're basically preparing for a possible weakening of the regime, because there have been also times in the history of Iran. So this is bigger, another one.
Well, yeah, if we have to start the interview
early, we can continue. I mean, it's not affecting me.
No, but I mean, if it, I'm pretty sure that there's plenty. I've been watching some conversations earlier today, and someone had to, end early because they're at risk. Yeah, this was a very big strike. So the thing is that because Erbil has this very large coalition presidents, and it's actually the only base which is very close to the Iranian border. So that's why we see a lot of strikes actually on this base since the US started to do this operations in Iran together with Israel. And actually, I was actually thinking just before this new attack started again, I was actually thinking, oh, maybe now it's going to decrease, because I also heard from some friends in Gulf countries that the number of attacks were slowly decreasing. But now I just heard like 4 or 5 explosions in a row. So that means that still it's going on. And also what's also interesting in Iraq, because I also want to talk about Iraq, you have like in Iraq, like several Iranian-backed armed groups that also called in Arabic Hashishabi, or the Popular Mobilization Units, that fought against ISIS in 2014. And those Shia armed groups, they have also been carrying out attacks on US troops with drone attacks, missile strikes, but also they have been targeting the Iraqi Kurds here. They have been targeting the energy infrastructure. So what we also saw in Iraqi Kurdistan, there are several oil companies here that are active. 5 oil companies, actually, they halted their operations because they're afraid they're going to be probably targeted. Although they didn't say that was the reason, they just mentioned the regional tensions in the region. And apart from that, also there have been attacks on Iranian Kurdish opposition group. I spoke to 2 of them. Both of them were targeted, but nobody got killed and injured. And actually, what is also interesting, that they said for the first time the US basically stopped missiles from hitting the Iranian Kurdish groups. Although I don't think that's US protecting those Kurdish opposition groups. I think it's more related to the fact that probably the protection zone around the Erbil airport has extended after the opening of the US consulate. So basically, anything now that Iran fires to Erbil, it's also seen as an attack on the US. So the US will do much more than in the past. Because, I remember still there was also an Iraqi Kurdish businessman who was killed by an Iranian ballistic missile strike. And he was a civilian, and Iran was claiming that he was a Mossad agent. And there was like this, some weird, a weird person. There was like an Israeli figure, and they said, oh, he had like meetings with this Israeli figure, and he was Mossad. And then it turned out that the Iranian state media basically fabricated those pictures with some badly photoshopped images, putting this Kurdish businessman together with this Israeli figure. And he was killed, and also some of his children were killed. There was also a Christian businessman was killed, and some of them, they had different nationalities, including Dutch. I'm Dutch, by the way. So it also created a little bit of diplomatic incident between the Netherlands and Iran at the time.
So Iraqi Kurdistan in general, even before this current war, there have been several of this like drone strikes, missile strikes, ballistic missiles, and it's all started actually in 2018 when Iran hit like the Iranian Kurds with a ballistic missile barrage. And actually at that day, I was actually planning to interview the Iranian Kurdish opposition group in that base that was targeted by the missile strike, but the person basically canceled the interview. So the next day I visited him actually, and I said, "Oh yeah, the interview was canceled." So I was basically lucky because there were several people killed in that ballistic missile strike. And at the time, I wrote for also a news publication that this ballistic missile strike at the time, 2018, was actually a message to Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States. And guess what? Iran today is hitting Israel and Saudi Arabia and U.S. bases in the region. So Iran was planning for this with this ballistic missile strike capability. But the first time I think they have used it outside of their borders is in 2018 in Iraqi Kurdistan. And that was a precursor what all this fight is now about between Iran, Israel, and Iran. It's this ballistic missile program and the nuclear program, because it's not only about the nuclear program anymore for Israel, because this ballistic, we saw also the discussions if these missiles could reach the United States. I mean, that's very difficult, but they can reach the Gulf countries in the region.
But Vladimir, you know, the latest reports now are saying that the Iranians may be open to negotiations, right? That they may be willing to revisit talks, according to The Atlantic, and Trump has said that he's willing to do that. But other people say that it's a facade, it's smoke and mirrors. Do you think that that's the case, that they actually do want to do that because they've because of the incredible impact the Americans have had, the Israelis have had?
Well, I mean, the Trump administration, they prefer like they don't want to end up what they always say, this like endless wars. They want to finish it quickly. So after, I mean, you could say for the Trump administration, I mean, they killed Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. I mean, before the US started the strikes on Iran, actually, Trump was like basically saying like, oh, I killed Baghdadi, I killed Soleimani in Iraq, by the way, during the first Trump administration. And now he could say also, I killed Khamenei, the supreme leader. So basically, it doesn't mean that there will be talks. But of course, now if there will be talks between Iran and the US, it will be a very different kind of talks. I mean, then it will be only on the US terms, basically. And I think like the US was very unhappy with the previous talks, and that's why they started to do these operations. And also, we saw also that the New York Times, before the strike started, that Trump was thinking of first doing like a strike to force Iran into negotiations. But at the same time, I mean, they're talking a lot about regime change, especially the Israelis. But of course, also Trump has his own agenda. And if he can make a deal, he's a deal maker. He always wants to make a deal. We saw that also in Venezuela. He basically got rid of Maduro and he made a deal with the remnants, what was left over of the regime. But the difference is that, although, I mean, you can discuss about it, I don't know much about Venezuela, but I do know that the Islamic Republic of Iran, it's a very ideological regime. I mean, they have been also very flexible in the past in negotiations with the West and the US, but at the same time, they have also sort of this apocalyptic worldview and the end war and like a very focused, you know, like focused on the history of Shia Islam and stuff. And they really see the US and Israel as, you know, the big Satan and the small Satan and this kind of discourse. But at the same time, it's also interesting that, I mean, at the same time, you have a lot of daughters and sons of these officials in the Islamic Republic that are living in the West at the same time, or they're using iPhones and everything, and they live in the West. So yeah, there's also a lot of contradictions, of course, thing, but it's more ideological, I think, than, for instance, the communist regime in Venezuela. But I think that Trump is willing to negotiate, but it doesn't mean that the war will stop. I mean, it could also just continue. There can be negotiation again and then strikes or not. But so far, there have also not been official confirmation by the Trump administration. And we also saw a statement by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that the strikes will escalate in the next few days. So,
do you think both can happen simultaneously? Right, the Iranians continue to strike. The US continues to strike. Iran continues to strike, but they're both negotiating. Meanwhile, a bit like sort of Russia and Ukraine are having talks, but Russia's bombing parts of Ukraine, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the same. I mean, you have these talks going on with the Ukrainians and the Russians and the US, and they're all still talking. And at the same time, the fighting is still going on. I mean, it's not like that only in Iran. We saw that also, for instance, in fighting between non-state actors and state actors. I mean, even in Syria, for instance, during the civil war in Syria, there were, for instance, attempts by Russians and Americans, and you had the Geneva talks about bringing the Syrian opposition and the Assad regime together. And at the same time, there was still basically fighting going on. So it's possible also that it goes together. It doesn't mean that you have peaceful talk that there will also be an ongoing, that there will be no conflict. I mean, it doesn't necessarily go in hand in hand, although some people think it's like immediately there should be like a huge ceasefire and everything.
Yeah, well, I do think there'll be a ceasefire though. And what does this all mean for the groups that are non-state actors, right? The ones that don't have their own nation state, the Kurds, but also parts of the communities in Iraq, because you mentioned the Iranian-Iraqi relationship. It's pretty complex. Some people have referenced the Iran-Iraq war of the 80s, obviously, compared to what we're seeing now. How do you think all that plays into it?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of history also. I mean, in general, also, I think, I'm not sure if this is an answer to your question, but also in general, like the Iranian Kurdish opposition parties don't have a good relationship with the monarchists, because it was the monarchists, for instance, that hanged Qazi Mohammed, the leader of the Mahabad Republic in the 1940s. And I mean, the Shah, they fought the Kurds. I myself, I have a very interesting book actually by the former chief of staff of the Iranian army about the Kurds, where he basically said, oh, I really fought in my life many years against the Kurds, but I still wanted to write a book about the Kurds. So I also have this interesting book from the former Iranian chief of staff, who was from the Shah time. So there's also this sort of bad history between Iranian Kurdish opposition parties and the Shah. And also the Shah, they have been always calling. I also want to say something like there's always this rhetoric that the Iranian Kurds want to separate from Iran. There was one Kurdish party that actually said they wanted to have Kurdish independence. But after there was this agreement between these 5 Kurdish parties, all of them said we want to have a sort of self-administration or autonomy in Iran, and we're not looking for separating from Iran. So I think this is also a way to get more acceptable, basically, in the international level, because no one is going to support these Iranian Kurdish groups if they're going to say, oh, we're going to separate from Iran. Because then you have always the term, like we saw that in Iraq and Syria by, for instance, the US, to say, okay, we're supporting the territorial integrity of Syria, of Iraq, etc. And with Iran, it will be the same. I also saw that there was a very very harsh statement by Pahlavi, where he basically said that these groups should not think about separatism, and the Iranian army should act and fight it. Although there's no Iranian army under Pahlavi's hands, in his hands. So I think that's like a situation. There's also a lot of history here that people seems to forget.
So where does that leave then the Turkish, right? Turkey is a fascinating player in all of this. They've got quite a unique presence in the Middle East. They're a NATO member, second largest standing army. Their relationship with Israel is non-existent over Palestine. So where do you see them coming into this? Is it purely about whether the Kurds would make moves, or it's more also about sort of what happens between the 3 main parties?
Yeah, I mean, it's also that the Iranian Kurdish parties, they have also different strategies concerning the Iranian opposition, but it remains to be seen also what happens with Iran, because as you said, like Trump is still offering negotiations, so they could also accept maybe a new Iranian regime just with different faces and a different policy towards Israel and the US. So it still remains to be seen if there really be a regime change. And I think also the reigning Kurdish parties until now, they're actually preparing for a potential collapse of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they're preparing to move into the mountainous borderless areas of Iranian Kurdistan. But so far they haven't done so because they're still waiting if it's really going to collapse or not. Because it also, if they move too fast, then the Iranian Islamic Republic will use it against. They say, oh yeah, you see, like they try to divide Iran, and then they can mobilize nationalists in Iran that are against that. Because you have this Iranian majority that's opposed to any form of autonomy or anything. So that's why these Iranian Kurdish groups are basically waiting for the situation to develop. If there's going to be, for instance, fighting between supporters of the monarchists with the supporters of the Islamic Republic. But until now, it's mostly US and Israeli strikes. I mean, there have been these calls also by Trump. He was calling, Trump before was calling up people to stay home and to stay safe. And then later, Netanyahu, in a later video, I think it was yesterday, was calling on people basically to take the streets. So that's also a situation that until now, before the US strikes on Iran, there were these protests in Iranian universities. We saw also videos after the death of Khamenei of people celebrating. Of course, we should also be realistic. There were also large sort of this funeral condolence marches sympathizing with Khamenei in Iraq, in Pakistan, and also inside Iran, especially in more religious cities. So yeah, there's also, but also, of course, there's also a fact that if you're gonna go and celebrate in the streets and you're gonna celebrate the death of Khamenei, and there's like an IRGC person in front of you with an armed gun, it's not that the Iranians have so much freedom to do that so easily. I mean, it's full these militarized streets, and they will be shot if they will do something like that. So it's not it's not like a football match that you can freely shout for one of the competing teams, you know. So I mean, that's like sometimes people also forget. Yeah, but those videos are fake. I mean, some of those videos are coming out. Also, there's not a lot of internet connections in Iran. Actually, you can get internet on the border. So sometimes it also happens is that more videos coming out from the border areas because they can connect to mobile internet.
Right. So they go out to the border areas. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, no, it's such a complex picture with the non-state actors as well. Some people worry that Iran could become like a Syria, in that you've got all these competing interests, some people working together, but also against one another, like a web. There's plenty of images of, like, you know, Russia being against the United States over the leadership of Syria, but then being with the US because of against ISIS. So, you know, what do you think are the short to medium outcomes from this? You know, is Iran going to be able to hold on, or are they just going to continue blanketing the rest of the Middle East? And if they're going to continue to strike, you know, even Iraq, right, what does that do for the limited relationships that they do still hold? Like Qatar was a country that had decent relations with Iran. They were one of the main mediators on behalf of Hamas and Palestine, right? But even they've been hit by the Islamic Republic.
Who's had been hit by the Islamic Republic? Oh, you mean the Gulf states?
Well, Qatar specifically, right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually found it also interesting because Qatar, they had like a quite strong relationship with Iran, and also Oman, and today also Oman was hit. So it actually, I mean, I remember with when the US for the first time hit Iran during when they hit the nuclear program. At that time, there was sort of this symbolic strike of Iran on an empty base. But now it's very different. I mean, they're basically hitting everywhere. And I mean, you also had some people, I can't remember who, there were some analysts were claiming that Iran basically told these Gulf states if this would happen, they will be targeted if they will not stop, if they will not lobby against this plan by Trump to attack those Gulf countries, then Iran would hit them. I'm not sure if that's true because I haven't seen any Iranian officials confirming that on the record. But the fact is that this is like temporarily, of course, I mean, it's not going to be forever, but temporarily, it seems to be creating some sort of more cohesion and unity among the Gulf states. They have had a lot of competition among each other. In the beginning, a lot of competition between Qatar and their neighbors. I mean, they almost wanted to invade Qatar, and they put a blockade on Qatar. I mean, and those issues were solved. And now you actually see a lot of competition between the Emiratis and the Saudis. also in Africa. And now you see that all of them are being attacked, including Oman, because Oman yesterday was not attacked, by the way. And the targets are not just US bases. I mean, officially say it's still US bases, but they're not targeting US bases. I mean, there was even drones near Burj Khalifa and other areas. So I think that's like a huge escalation. I mean, in the past, Iran has also targeted oil infrastructure in the Gulf. For instance, we remember the incident of Aramco, and I think it was in Saudi Arabia. But until now, it's actually, I find interesting that they seem to have not targeted oil infrastructure. They have actually seemed to be targeted mostly civilian infrastructure and US bases. And sorry, I was just listening if I can hear something again.
No, it's a very real threat for you. But no, I agree. I think that the Iranians, after the death of Khamenei, have decided that all bets are off. Everything's on the table to a certain extent. Oman did surprise me. Cyprus did surprise me. Turkey hasn't been hit though either, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just...
Well, I think Iran would never be so brazen. I think Iran would never be so brazen to attack a NATO ally. Turkish army is very big, very advanced. I mean, Turkish army has a lot of experience in Syria, in Iran. There have been also in the past. I mean, in Syria there was some strikes by Turkey on Iranian-backed groups that they have basically vanquished.
Right.
So I mean, that's the situation. I really doubt that they're gonna do something. Because Turkey also, because as I said, it like has a very big army, one of the biggest armies of NATO, is probably the largest army of NATO, and I don't think Turkey's going to sit down if Iran do something like that. And also, you should also realize that there are relations between Erdogan and the Islamic Republic. Turkey was lobbying very hard also for these attacks not to happen, because Turkey was basically afraid of Israeli influence in the region improving, because we saw, for instance, in this Washington Post op-ed of Reza Pahlavi, that he said if he takes power, he's going to make relations with Israel and going to restore balance and make go back to the Abraham Accords. And remember also the Shah in the past, he also had some relations with Israel. I remember very clearly from reading books basically that in the past, for instance, Israel and the Shah were supporting the Iraqi Kurds against the Iraqi regime in the past. I think it was in the history, basically dozens of years ago. So I think that's, I think like there's still a relationship with Turkey, and Turkey is also very afraid about the refugee flows. I mean, during the January protests and also the 12-day war, there have been Iranians going to Turkey. And I think also one of the reasons that Turkey they see as a transit country to Europe, because, the Syrians, they also used to do that. They will go from Syria to Turkey, and then from there they will try to go to Europe. Although I think now the route of Turkey, it's very difficult to cross from there into Europe. And much more countries are using the Libya route actually now. I mean, people trying to flee the Middle East. So we have to see how this will develop. Also, there were some Iranian refugees during January that went actually to Armenia. And also, I think almost nobody talks about Azerbaijan. So if I were you, I would ask someone from Azerbaijan on their perspective, because also it's interesting that Azerbaijan and Turkey, they have different relationships. Azerbaijan was very heavily supported by Israel in their fight against Armenia some time ago when there was this fight about Nagorno-Karabakh. I don't know how to pronounce it well. So there was like this. Yeah, so at that time there was also Israeli drones supporting. They were like used by the Azerbaijani army against Armenia. But Turkey, especially after the Gaza war, they have a much more hostile relationship with Israel. But I think Azerbaijan still has a very good relationship with Israel. So it's also interesting that almost nobody talks about Azerbaijan. And also what's interesting, there have been no strikes on Azerbaijan by Iran. Of course, there's no U.S. base in Azerbaijan that they can use as a reason. But I mean, also there's not like an Israeli military base or something. But I mean, Iran really didn't do anything in Azerbaijan, and actually, of course, the Azeri army is also not. I mean, they have a capable army also, and they have been supported by the Turkish army and by the Israeli army. But so far, almost nobody's talking about what Azerbaijan's policy is on the current changes in Iran.
That's a good point. We will definitely have to have someone on of that nature to talk about it. I think, Vladimir, it's the one previous leader of Azerbaijan, I think, said that Turkey and Azerbaijan were, one nation, two states, one nation, right? Because they share such an overlapping ideological outlook, and they've been the unprecedented winner from the whole Caucasus outgo. Oh, I can hear that blast there. So yeah, no, they're definitely worth. There's a huge population of Azerbaijani Iranians in the northwest as well. Yeah, absolutely. But Vladimir, no, go for it. I was just going to say before you add your final remarks, just like, where do you think this goes? Like, give us sort of your thoughts on the next 24 hours. We'll obviously have to have you back soon to talk about it again.
I mean, we have to see how this will move. I mean, the Iranian regime is very much weakened. There's all these opposition parties that are thinking of moving in. So it really depends on if Trump is going back to negotiations with the leftovers of the regime or not, and impose some form of a Venezuela solution, or if what Israel wants. I'm not sure, like, what the Israeli policy is. It's like, are they really want to have regime change, or they just want the regime to collapse and have instability? Because we also have this analyst on X, for instance, talking about, no, this will be very bad for Israel and the US if Iran is in chaos. I really don't think so. I mean, we saw it in Syria. A weakened Syria during the civil war was actually much more beneficial for Israel. What you have now, that you now have, again, a Syrian central state united under Sunni majority, which actually has bad relationship with Israel. So for Israel, it was better to have a weak Assad than a strong new Sunni majority government in Syria. And Iran is, of course, very different, because I think if the opposition takes over in Iran, then they will probably make relations with Israel, because Pahlavi is very pro-Israeli. So I think that's the biggest difference, considering with Syria, because the new government in Syria is clearly not pro-Israeli. I mean, they are an Islamist government, and they have many elements that with jihadist past, and they're still shouting like slogans in favor of the Palestinians in the streets of Damascus, the Syrian new army. So I think that's the biggest difference. And also with the Iranians are more, the supporters of Pahlavi are much more secular, and they also have this sort of movement, they want to go back to their pre-Islamic roots and this kind of things, and they're wearing the Zoroastrian necklaces and this kind of stuff. So that's very different. Like, we're going to see a very different Iran if the Islamic Republic falls. But as you said, there's no ground force until now. The US is not going to put good boots on the ground. Israel not going to put boots on the ground. So if the Iranian opposition, if the Iranian protesters don't take the streets, that could also happen during negotiations. If, for instance, Trump start talking with Iran, and there will be a temporary stop of fighter jets, that then suddenly have a protest movement in the streets or something. And also, we should also remember there's many cells of Israel on the ground. I mean, Israel itself, for instance, you also had Mike Pompeo. He was making this tweet, which didn't really help the protesters, because, Iran in the past have executed many people for alleged ties to Israel, and often there were no proof of that. And he was saying, like, behind every protester, there's one Mossad or something. So that's probably too much exaggerated, but the fact is that Israel has probably people on the ground that could also try to instigate such things. And we also saw from the reporting that the CIA also has people on the ground, because otherwise, how they would have known that the supreme leader was meeting with these people and they were targeted by the strikes. So yeah, that's what I would have to say about the current situation in Iran. And with the Iranian Kurds, I think the Iranian Kurds, they can play a big role if the regime weakens, especially in the Kurdish majority areas. But that could also bring in Turkey. It could also result in a nationalist backlash from the Persian majority. But we have to see how it will work in the end. And if this regime really weakens. But the Iranian Kurds are ready. They are armed. They are not like the supporters of the Shah. They have weapons. They have fighters. They are next to the border. So they can easily do something inside Iranian Kurdistan very quickly if the regime collapses in Iranian Kurdistan or in the Kurdistan province of Iran. So we have to see how this will develop, and if Israel and US are going to go for a regime change, or just having a weakened regime and with some weakened persons on the ground as proxies. Thank you.
No, absolutely, Vladimir. And as usual, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? It's somewhere mixed it up amongst that. But everyone, thanks very much for watching. Do check out Vladimir's work. He's on the ground, literally. So knows better than everyone, and we'll definitely have to have you back later on in the week. I thank Vladimir, and everyone do subscribe, like the video, and well, stay tuned. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot, Vladimir.
You're welcome. Have a good day.